I always wake up at first light. 77 years old is no reason to change a lifetime of habits. I gently pull back the blanket, fumble for my soft house slippers, and slowly get out of bed. My joints ache with a dull ache. The arthritis is a reminder every morning, especially in the damp weather Newport is known for. My bedroom window overlooks the bay, misty, calm, with white dots of sails on the horizon. The house sits on a small hill, and there is always a light, salty breeze on this side facing the sea. Frank, my late husband, chose this spot 35 years ago. "This is where we'll meet old age, Lou," he said then. But I'm the only one meeting old age. Frank passed away 10 years ago, leaving me in this spacious three-bedroom house with a living room with a fireplace and a garden that requires constant maintenance. I go down to the kitchen, put the kettle on, and take eggs out of the fridge. The usual breakfast: a soft-boiled egg, buttered toast, and a cup of strong tea. I always eat breakfast alone, sitting at a small table by the window and watching the news on the tablet my grandson Thomas gave me last Christmas. Technology has never intimidated me. 30 years of teaching school has taught me to adapt to change. I'm just finishing my breakfast when I hear the sound of a car pulling up. I glance at my watch, 9 o'clock on a Sunday morning. Too early for unscheduled visits. Through the large living room window, I see my son's black SUV. Jim never arrives unannounced. "Mom," I hear a voice say, accompanied by an impatient phone call. I adjust the collar of my homemade dress and head for the door. My movements are slow but sure. Haste is the luxury of youth. "Jim, what a surprise," I say as I open the door. "And Sarah's with you. Come in." My son gives me a quick, almost formal peck on the cheek. He's tall, with gray beginning to show in his blonde hair, and he's inherited his father's broad shoulders and habit of slouching. Sarah, his second wife, stands just behind him, a slender blonde in an expensive beige coat and high-heeled shoes. "Hello, Lucia." Sarah smiles, showing off her perfect teeth. "How are you feeling?" "Wonderful, darling. Come in. I'm just having breakfast. Would you like to join me?" "No, we've already eaten," Jim replies quickly, walking into the living room and giving her an appraising look. "Mom, how long have you been cleaning? It's dusty in here." I smile demurely. "Mrs. Patterson comes on Tuesdays and Fridays. It's Sunday, Jim." "You still got that old git?" Jim shakes his head. "I mean, she can barely walk. She's 65 and doing just fine." I sit down in my favorite chair by the fireplace. "What brings you here so early?" Jim and Sarah look at each other. Sarah nods slightly, as if giving her husband permission to speak. "Mom, Sarah and I have been discussing your situation," Jim begins, sitting down on the edge of the couch. "This house is too big for you alone. The stairs, the garden, the constant repairs." "I can manage," I answer calmly. "For now, maybe," Sarah intervenes, sitting down next to her husband. "But you have to think about the future, Lucia. We found a wonderful place, Sunny Gardens. It's a modern boarding house for the elderly with medical care, daily activities, a nursing home," I finish for her. "Retirement residence," Sarah corrects me. "It's beautiful there. We took a tour. Everyone has their own apartment, but there's 24-hour care." I take a sip of the tea I brought with me from the kitchen. The cup trembles slightly in my hands, not from excitement, but from arthritis. "What's going to happen to the house while I enjoy my apartment?" Jim fidgets in his seat. "Well, we'd, keep an eye on it. Probably rent it out or—" He hesitates. "Sold him," I finish for him. "It's the smart thing to do, Mom. Keeping the house eats up most of your pension. Selling would give you a comfortable old age." I look out the window, at the bay visible between the neighboring houses. For the last 10 years, I've been waking up to that view. "My answer is no," I say quietly but firmly. "I will stay in my house. Thank you for your concern, but I'm not out of my mind yet to not realize what's going on." Sarah and Jim look at each other again. "Mom, don't be selfish." Jim's voice gets harder. "All your life you've thought only of yourself. First, your precious job that made you never have time for your own son. Now this house." I feel that familiar wave of guilt and irritation rising inside. This conversation has been repeated dozens of times over the past 30 years. "Jim, I had to work to provide for you. Your father couldn't—" Don't start with my father again, Jim interrupts. I'm just saying that you're 77 and it's time to think about what comes next. Sarah and I won't be able to look after you when you're finally gone. I'm not asking you to take care of me. I put the cup back on the table. And I don't think I'm going to be down anytime soon. It's inevitable at your age, Lucia, Sarah says softly. We just want everything to be organized in advance. Organized, I think. How convenient to schedule someone else's life, especially when there's a reward at the end in the form of a house overlooking the bay. I appreciate your concern. I rise from my chair, signaling that the conversation is over. But my decision is final. I'm staying here. Jim stands up too, his face contorted with poorly concealed disappointment. Think it over, Mom. We'll come back in a couple days, discuss it again. It's not worth it, Jim. My answer won't change. Sarah smiles strainedly and takes my hand. We're worried about you, Lucia. What if something happens and you're alone? I have a panic button. I point to the small pendant around my neck. And the neighbors stop by every day. I'm not alone, Sarah. As I walk them to the door, I notice Jim looking around the house with the same appraising manner with which he looked at the living room. It's like he's figuring out how much he can get for it. Take care of yourself, Mom, he says goodbye. And think about our offer. As the black SUV rounds the corner, I return to the chair by the fireplace. The house, so spacious and sunny in the morning, suddenly feels empty and humming. I understand Jim. Partly. I really had to work hard when he was a kid. Frank, a talented architect, suffered from depression, periodically lost his job, and took a long time to find a new one. The money I brought in by teaching school was often the family's only stable income. We were only able to buy a house thanks to the inheritance we received after Frank's father died. Jim always accused me of not paying enough attention to him, but he never saw me cry at night when I didn't know how to make ends meet. He never saw me saving money on myself to buy him new sneakers or pay for sports. And now that I finally had a chance to live in peace, a 40-year teacher's pension, some savings, and a fully paid mortgage, Jim felt I owed it all to him, as if to make up for his less-than-perfect childhood. I pick up my phone and dial a number I know by heart, even though I rarely use it. Connor? It's me, I say when a low male voice answers the other end. Could you come over? I need some advice. Is something wrong, Lou? I can hear the concern in his voice. Jim was here, with Sarah. They were talking about the nursing home again. And selling the house, that's not a question. Yeah, I'm scared, Connor. They were more persistent this time. I'll be there in an hour. I'm just finishing up a few things. I hang up the phone and cover my eyes. Connor Rook always comes into my life when I need him most. A former FBI agent, he met me and Frank at a fundraiser 30 years ago. There was an instant connection between Connor and me, not just a physical attraction, but a deep mutual understanding. Our affair lasted for years. Secret meetings, rare weekends together on the pretext of attending conferences or visiting old friends. Frank, immersed in his projects and fighting depression, didn't notice anything, or pretended not to notice. Jim, consumed with his own teenage problems, was all the more oblivious to my life. After Frank died, Connor and I had the opportunity to be together openly, but we decided to keep things the way they are. Connor lives in his house on the other side of town. I live here. We see each other once or twice a week, sometimes traveling together. It's a freedom that suits us both. Jim doesn't know about Connor, or rather, he knows him as an old family friend who occasionally drops in for tea. I've never let my son in on the details of my personal life. Neither did he me. I found out about marrying Sarah after the fact with a dry text message and a picture from Vegas. The phone in my hand vibrates a message from Connor. Checking out. Don't worry, we'll figure something out. I smile. At 79, Connor remains the same determined man he was when we met. I know I can count on him, especially now that I sense Jim won't stop at mere persuasion. In his eyes, I see a determination bordering on obsession. I get up and walk over to the window, looking out over the bay. The white sails of the yacht seem tiny against the vast blue. It's a view worth fighting for. And the right to decide where and how to spend the rest of my days. Connor's visit brought me some relief. We sat in the living room for a few hours, discussing our options. Connor suggested legal protection, like putting the house in a trust or signing a life annuity with some agency. But all of that took time. If you feel anything wrong, call me immediately. Connor said goodbye. Any time of day, Lou. The 3 days after Jim and Sarah's visit were quiet. I did the usual things: cooking, reading, calling my grandson Thomas, who was in college on the other side of the country. On Wednesday, Mrs. Patterson came over and helped with the general cleaning. Jim didn't call, and I hoped he had temporarily abandoned his venture. That hope turned out to be in vain. On Thursday, around 11 a.m., as I was finishing my daily half-hour yoga session for seniors, the doorbell rang. Through the stained glass of the veranda, I saw Jim's familiar silhouette. But he wasn't alone. A short, full-bodied man in a business suit stood next to him. I opened the door, feeling my pulse quicken. Jim, I nodded. I wasn't expecting you so soon. Hello, Mom? Jim tried to smile, but it was a strained smile. This is Dr. Miller. He'd like to talk to you. I shifted my gaze to the stranger. The man was in his mid-50s, with balding hair, small, close-set eyes, and a sweaty forehead. He held out his hand. Dr. Warren Miller, neurogeriatrician. It's very nice to meet you, Mrs. Callow. I didn't respond to the handshake, feeling the anxiety building inside. I didn't make an appointment with a neurogeriatrician, Dr. Miller. Your son is very concerned about your condition, Mrs. Callow. He's asked me for an informal consultation. I looked at Jim. He was carefully avoiding my gaze. Come in. I stepped back, allowing them into the house. But I don't have any health problems that require specialist counseling. We walked into the living room. I sat in my favorite chair, and Jim and Dr. Miller sat on the couch across from me. The doctor took a notebook and pen out of his briefcase. Mrs. Callow, can you tell me about your typical day? What do you do? For what purpose, Dr. Miller? Just to get an overview of how you function. I glanced over at Jim. He was staring out the window, tapping his fingers nervously on his knee. I wake up around 6 in the morning, eat breakfast, read the news. Then I do yoga, 45 minutes in a program for seniors. Sometimes I go to the store or the post office. It's not far. In the afternoon, I read or watch soap operas. Once a week, I go to the book club at the library. In the evening, I usually call my grandson or friends. Dr. Miller wrote something down in his notebook. Do you often forget what needs to be done? Maybe you leave the stove on or can't remember where you put things? No more often than any other person, I answered, starting to get annoyed. Dr. Miller, what exactly are you trying to find out? Jim answered instead of the doctor. Mom, Sarah and I have noticed that you've become forgetful. You're repeating the same stories, forgetting our conversations. We think it's getting hard for you to live alone. That's not true, Jim. I felt my shoulders tense. I'm doing just fine on my own. Mrs. Callow, Dr. Miller leaned forward. Your son also mentioned instances of you being aggressive or paranoid. Aggression? I couldn't believe my ears. Jim, what is he talking about? Jim looked away again. You accused Sarah of wanting to steal your jewelry, and you yelled at us during the last visit. That is an absolute lie. I felt the blood rush to my face. I never... You see, Doctor? Jim turned to Miller. She immediately becomes angry and denies the obvious. I deny the lie, Jim. You know perfectly well that nothing of the sort ever happened. Dr. Miller wrote something down again. Mrs. Callow, could you give me today's date and the name of the incumbent president? Today is Thursday, June 17th, 2025. The president is Donald Trump, re-elected last year. Dr. Miller, this is an absurd situation, and I'm asking you to leave my house. I stood up, signaling that the conversation was over. Jim stood up as well, but instead of walking toward the exit, he pulled a folded piece of paper from his inside jacket pocket. Mom, Dr. Miller already examined you a month ago. Don't you remember? Here's his report. I froze. It was an outright lie. I'd never met the man before today. Give me that. I held out my hand for the document. Jim handed me the sheet. It was a medical report with the official letterhead of some clinic. At the top was my name and date of birth. Below that, a diagnosis, early stages of dementia, Alzheimer's type, and a recommendation. Patient needs constant supervision and care. At the bottom was a signature, sprawling, almost illegible, but clearly Dr. Miller's, sitting across from me. It's a fake, I said quietly. feeling my insides go cold. I've never been to see Dr. Miller. You don't remember, Mom. It's part of your disease to forget recent events. I looked at Dr. Miller. He was sitting there with a nonchalant look, as if this was a routine procedure. I request another examination. From my doctor, Dr. Bishop. She's been seeing me for 15 years and will certify that I'm of sound mind. We've already spoken to Dr. Bishop, Jim said with fake sympathy in his voice. She agrees with Dr. Miller's diagnosis. It wasn't just a lie anymore, it was a well-planned conspiracy. I clenched my fists, feeling my nails dig into my palms. I'm calling my lawyer, I said, heading for the phone. That won't help, Mom. Jim pulled out another document. This is the court order appointing me as your guardian due to incapacity. It's already in effect. I took the paper. It was indeed a court order dated last week. It declared me medically incompetent and appointed Jim as my legal guardian, with full control of my estate. That's impossible, I whispered. There would have been a hearing. I should have been notified. There was a hearing, Mom. You were present with a court-appointed attorney. You don't remember again. I felt the room begin to spin before my eyes. I needed to contact Connor immediately, but not in front of them. I needed to buy time. What are you going to do? I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. I've already filed the papers to sell the house, Jim answered, and now there was no attempt at concern in his voice. We'll use the proceeds to pay for your stay at Sunny Gardens. You'll move in next Tuesday. And if I say no? Jim and Dr. Miller looked at each other. Then I'm afraid we'll have to put you in a mental institution for involuntary treatment, Mrs. Callow, Dr. Miller said. I have every reason to recommend it if you show any resistance. That was blackmail. Pure blackmail. I looked at my son, trying to find some doubt in his eyes, some shred of affection. But there was only the cold triumph of a man who'd gotten what he wanted. Does Sarah know what you're doing? I asked. It was her idea. Jim grinned. She found Dr. Miller. A very enterprising woman, my wife. I sank into the chair, feeling suddenly weak. I had to do something, but what? The court order had already gone into effect. If I resisted, they could really put me in a mental institution. I needed to buy time, get in touch with Connor, maybe find an honest lawyer. I need to think, I said. Give me at least a day. There's nothing to think about, Mom, Jim said. The decision's already been made. Here's the deed to the house. You just need to sign it. He put another stack of papers in front of me. What if I don't sign? I looked up at him. Then I'll sign for you as your legal guardian. But it's easier if you do it yourself. Less questions at the notary's office. I took the papers in my hands, pretending to read. In fact, the letters were blurring in front of my eyes. I frantically searched for a way out. I need to pack, I said, trying to buy time. Personal things I want to take with me to this boarding house. You'll have time for that, Jim nodded. But first you have to sign the papers. I felt a wave of anger rising inside me. This man, my son, the one I'd raised, the one I'd worked to exhaustion for, was now robbing me of everything in cold blood. Why, Jim? I asked quietly. Why are you doing this to me? Something flashed in his eyes for a moment, maybe shame or doubt, but it disappeared quickly. Oh, because it's fair, he answered. You've always been a cold, distant mother. Always put your work before me. Now I need this house, for my family, for my future. And you'll live out the rest of your days in comfort. I shook my head. I was never cold, Jim. I just did what I could to provide for us. Leave your father alone. Jim's sudden outburst. You were always using him as a shield. Poor, weak, sick Frank. And me. I was just an extra, a burden. I looked at my son, and I didn't recognize him. Had he been carrying around this resentment all these years? This distorted version of our life? Jim, it's not true. I loved you more than anything in the world. That's enough. He jumped up, his face contorted with rage. Just sign the damn papers. The house doesn't belong to you anymore. Forget about it. His shout echoed through the living room. Dr. Miller looked slightly embarrassed, but made no move to intervene. I realized it was useless to argue. I had to pretend to be broken, agree, and then contact Connor when they left. Okay, I said quietly, picking up a pen. Where do you want me to sign? Jim calmed down a little, pointed his finger at the bottom of the last page. Here, and initial each page right here in the corner. I began to sign the papers, page by page. Inside, I was seething with indignation and pain, but outwardly, I remained calm. I couldn't let them suspect that I was up to something. That's it, Jim said as I signed the last of the papers. The house is now officially in my possession. A notary will be here tomorrow to notarize the deeds. Can I pack my things? I asked, trying to keep my voice humble. Of course, Mom. Jim was suddenly almost gracious. You have all weekend. Sarah and I will move in here on Monday and we'll take you to the boarding house on Tuesday. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Jim and Dr. Miller got ready to leave. See you tomorrow, Mom. Jim even tried to hug me goodbye, but I pulled away. As soon as the door closed behind them, I rushed to the phone. My hands were shaking so badly that I couldn't dial Connor's number right away. Connor, I said when he answered. I'm in trouble. Jim forged the medical records. He'd gotten me declared incompetent and appointed him guardian. Connor arrived 40 minutes after I called. I watched through the window as his silver sedan pulled up in front of the house. Despite his age, Connor moved with the energy of a 60-year-old tall, trim, with thick gray hair and a military bearing. Even his casual clothes dark blue slacks and a tweed jacket fitted him impeccably. I opened the door before he could ring the bell. Lou. He immediately took my hands in his, looking into my eyes. Are you okay? I don't know, Connor, I answered honestly, feeling my fake calm crumble under his concerned gaze. He took my house away from me, my own son. We walked to the living room. I pulled out the papers Jim had left behind and held them out to Connor. He scrutinized every page, frowning harder and harder. This is pure fraud, he said at last. Forging medical documents, perjury in court. Your son and this so-called doctor will be dead when law enforcement gets a hold of them. But that takes time. I sank into the chair, feeling unusually tired. And I don't have much time. He and Sarah are moving here on Monday, and I'm going to the boarding house on Tuesday. Connor sat down across from me, putting his papers on the coffee table. You said yes? I signed the papers, if that's what you mean. I had no choice. He threatened a mental institution. Connor shook his head. Oh, Lou, you were always too soft on him. There was no reproach in his words, only sadness. He always thought I was too indulgent with Jim, too concerned about his feelings. Maybe he was right. Do you remember when we met? Connor asked suddenly. I smiled, despite the circumstances. Of course, a charity event for veteran police officers. Frank was invited as the architect who designed the new wing of the memorial complex. And you were the most beautiful woman in the audience. Connor smiled too. In a blue dress with a pearl barrette in her hair. Do you even remember the barrette? I remember every detail, Lou. The way you laughed at the mayor's joke. How you frowned when someone spilled wine on the tablecloth. The way you furtively yawned during the police chief's particularly boring speech. I shook my head. And I didn't even realize you were watching me. Oh, I was very careful. Connor grinned. A former FBI agent knows how to remain undetected. But when you stepped away from the window during the dance, I decided to take a chance. I remembered that moment. We were standing at the window, looking out at the lights of the city, talking about everything. Books, music, politics. Frank was discussing his new project with some official and didn't notice our absence. You said you hadn't met such an intelligent and interesting woman in a long time, I remembered. And that was the truth. I wasn't planning to start an affair, Lou. I knew you were married. Neither of us did, I sighed. But Frank at the time, it was another period of depression. He wouldn't talk to me for weeks, locked himself in his office, and you saw me. You really saw me. I remembered our first kiss in his car when he gave me a ride home from some art show. Frank had refused to go then, saying he had a headache. Connor offered me a ride and I accepted. We sat outside my house for a long time, talking, hesitant to get out of the car and end the evening. And then he leaned in and kissed me, tentatively, as if afraid of my reaction. Remember our first trip? Connor asked, as if reading my mind. Vermont, I nodded. A little hotel in the mountains. I told Frank I was going to a teacher's conference. And I took a 3-day vacation, Connor smiled. The best 3 days of my life. After that trip, we couldn't stop. The secret meetings in hotels, the rare weekends together, the phone calls at night when Frank was already asleep. We were careful never appearing together in public places, never leaving a trail. Connor was an expert at stealth, and I learned quickly. Sometimes I think Frank guessed, I said quietly. But he never asked. Maybe he was comfortable. I didn't demand attention from him, didn't blame him for his depression, his reticence. Do you regret it? Connor asked seriously. I thought for a moment. About being with you, never. About lying to Frank sometimes. He was a good man, just broken. And after he died? Did you ever think we could have been together openly? It was a question we'd carefully avoided all these years. After Frank died, I was alone in the house, and Connor offered to move in with me or take me in with him, but I refused. I was afraid, Connor, I admitted. Afraid that Jim would find out the truth, that he'd hate me even more. He'd always idealized his father, and he'd always thought of me as cold and aloof. If he found out about you and me? Connor nodded. I understand, Lou. I really do. But right now, don't you think you've been worrying about his feelings for nothing? I grinned bitterly. I do now. But that doesn't mean I was wrong then. Connor stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the horizon. His silhouette against the setting sun looked so familiar, so trustworthy. I have a plan, Lou, he said at last, turning to me. But it's going to require a certain toughness. Jim has committed a serious crime, forgery of medical records, fraud, maybe even bribery of public officials if this judge was in cahoots. He could get real jail time. I felt my heart clench. I don't want Jim to go to prison, Connor. No matter what, he's my son. I know, he said softly. And I'm not suggesting we take this to sentencing, but we need to scare him enough to make him back off. How? I still have connections at the Bureau and the D.A.S office. We can open an investigation, do some preliminary interviews, maybe even detain him temporarily. And then you can generously drop the charges, but on the condition that he rescinds all those documents and leaves you alone. I thought about it. It was a risky plan. Jim could get even angrier. But on the other hand, I had no choice. It wasn't just about the house. It was about my freedom, my right to decide my own fate. And this doctor, Dr. Miller? I asked. Oh, he'll break first, Connor said confidently. They always do. He's probably already involved in schemes like this, and if you dig deeper, a lot of interesting things will come out. One call to the state medical board. I pictured Dr. Miller testifying against Jim, my son sitting in a holding cell. It was painful. There has to be another way, I said. Connor came over and sat down next to me, taking my hands in his. What's that, Lou? Time is playing against us. They'll be here by Monday. We could appeal to the court, but that would take weeks, if not months. And by then, the house could be sold. I know, I squeezed his hands. It's just, I always tried to protect Jim, even when he was wrong. Old habit, I guess. Sometimes the best way to protect someone is to let them face the consequences of their actions, Connor said softly. It might be the only way for Jim to realize what he was doing. Deep down, I knew he was right. All these years I'd indulged Jim, made excuses for him, protected him from the consequences. Maybe that's why he'd grown up the way he had, thinking he could take whatever he wanted without thinking about others. Okay, I said finally. Let's do it. But I don't want Jim behind bars for a long time. Just so he understands, I'll set it up. Connor breathed out a sigh of relief. I need to make some calls. Can I use your office? He retreated into the small room I used as my home office. I could hear his muffled voice, calm, businesslike, confident. Connor was calling his former co-workers, old friends, people to whom he had long-standing debts. Half an hour later, he returned, looking pleased. Everything's in motion, he said. Tomorrow morning, Dr. Miller would be visited by the state medical board and an FBI agent. They'll be at Jim's place too, with a warrant for questioning and seizure of documents. So soon? I was surprised. I still have some clout, Connor replied with a slight smile. And the case is really serious. Fraud using fake medical documents, potential theft of property. Plus, I've hinted that there might be an organized group involved. if this Miller guy is regularly issuing such certificates? What am I supposed to do? I asked. Nothing. Live your life as usual. If Jim calls or comes over, act normal. Don't give him any reason to suspect anything's wrong. What if he decides to speed things up? Pick me up early? He can't. I've already contacted my lawyer. He's filing an emergency motion tomorrow to suspend custody pending a full investigation. That will give us a legal defense. I nodded, feeling the tension release a little. Connor was always like that. He took control of the situation, thought out all the details. Stay the night, I asked suddenly. I don't want to be alone. Connor smiled. Sure, Lou. I'm not going anywhere. At that moment, my cell phone rang. Jim's number. I showed the screen to Connor and he nodded. Answer it. Hello? I tried to make my voice sound normal. Hi, Mom. Jim's voice was unexpectedly cheerful. How are you doing? Are you packing? Yeah, a little bit, I lied. So much stuff has accumulated over the years. Don't take too much. There's not much room at the boarding house. Just the essentials. Sure, Jim. Listen, Sarah and I decided to come tomorrow to look at the house again. We need to decide what furniture to keep, what to sell. Do you mind? I glanced at Connor, and he shook his head negatively. Actually, I was planning to visit Martha tomorrow, I said, calling out my old friend's name. We haven't seen each other in a while, and I wanted to say goodbye before I left. I see. Jim sounded annoyed. Well, we'll be there anyway. I've got the keys. Don't be alarmed if you come back and see us. Okay, Jim. After a short goodbye, I hung up. They want to come over tomorrow, I told Connor, to plan some renovations or something. Great, he nodded. We'll have people working on the place by the time they get here. I can imagine their faces when they find out Dr. Miller is testifying. There was a dangerous glint in his eyes. I knew that look. It's the way Connor used to look when he was hunting a criminal in his FBI days. Do you think he's really going to give Jim up that fast? I asked hesitantly. I'm sure, Connor answered firmly. People like that only care about their own skin. As soon as he realizes he's facing losing his license and jail time, he'll spill everything he knows. I wondered how Jim and Sarah would react when the agents showed up. Jim would probably freak out, start calling me with accusations, or maybe he'd try to expedite the sale of the house before it was too late. What if they'd already found a buyer? I worried. What if the house is already in the process of being sold? Without your signature at the notary's office, the deal isn't valid, Connor reassured me. Even with the guardianship papers, it would take Jim a while to formalize everything legally, and we wouldn't give him that time. Connor stayed with me that night. We lay in my bedroom, looking out the window at the starry sky. His arm around me, and for the first time in a long time, I felt safe. You know, Connor said quietly, maybe after all this, we should rethink our arrangement. What do you mean? Maybe we should stop hiding. Live together, here or at my place, like a normal couple. I turned to him. Are you suggesting I move in with you? Or I move in with you? He smiled. Whatever you want to do. I just think we've been hiding for too long. Life isn't infinite, Lou. Even if we have 10 or 15 years left, I want to spend them with you. Not in secret, not in snatches. I rested my head on his shoulder, mulling over his words. Maybe he was right. Maybe it was time to stop living in the shadows. Let's deal with this situation first, I said, and then we'll decide. Sure, he kissed my forehead. First, we'll give you back your home and your freedom. At the same time, across town, in an expensive apartment overlooking the ocean, Jim and Sarah Callow were discussing their plans. They were sitting on the terrace, sipping wine and looking at furniture catalogs. I think the living room needs a complete makeover, Sarah said, flipping through a glossy magazine. Those old-fashioned armchairs and sofa are a nightmare, and the curtains, God, those curtains. They must have been there since the 80s. Do whatever you want, Jim said absent-mindedly, looking at something on his tablet. The main thing is to get the house ready for sale by the end of the summer. For sale? Sarah raised her eyebrows. I thought we were going to live there. For a while, yeah. But this house is in an older neighborhood, Sarah. We could sell it and buy something a little more, upscale. Bellevue Hills, for example. with an ocean view, a pool, maybe a tennis court. Sarah's eyes lit up. Bellevue Hills, really? I didn't think we could afford it. Mom's house is worth about $1 million. Jim sipped his wine. Plus my savings. We can get a good mortgage. I should have a promotion in a year or two if everything goes according to plan. Oh, Jim! Sarah jumped up and hugged her husband. That's just wonderful! Can you imagine how jealous my girlfriends will be? Especially that upstart Melanie and her supposedly successful lawyer husband. Jim smiled, clearly pleased with his wife's reaction. I'll have to do some renovations before I sell. Renovate the bathrooms, maybe the kitchen, but that'll drive up the price. What about your mother? Sarah suddenly asked. Won't she cause problems? What kind of trouble would she cause? Jim shrugged his shoulders. She's officially recognized as incapacitated. And once she's in the boarding house, she won't know what's going on with the house at all. I hope you're right. Sarah looked worried. It's just, she doesn't look like someone with dementia. She's thinking clearly. It's just an appearance. Jim brushed it off. Dr. Miller explained that in the early stages, there are periods of lucidity, but then the condition deteriorates dramatically. Believe me, in 6 months she won't even remember the house. If you say so. Sarah picked up the magazine again. So what about the furniture? I think we should get a new couch. This leather one right here. And maybe these chairs? Saturday morning was surprisingly sunny for Newport. I woke up early as usual, but Connor was awake. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee and the sound of quiet conversation wafting from the kitchen. Connor was on the phone with someone, his voice sounding collected and businesslike. I took a leisurely shower, got dressed, and went downstairs. Connor was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, looking through some papers. Good morning, he smiled. Coffee? I'd love some. I sat down across from him. News? Everything's going according to plan. Connor poured me coffee. Dr. Miller has already been visited, early this morning, with a warrant to search his office and seize documents. He's panicked and cooperative. So soon? I was surprised. I guess our doctor has a lot of sins. Connor grinned. As soon as he realized what he was facing, he decided to turn in all his clients, including your son. Turns out Miller was already under the medical board's scrutiny. Several complaints from patients. Our request just expedited the process. And Jim? I asked anxiously. They haven't touched him yet, but it's all set. As soon as he shows up here, people from the FBI and the DA's office will be on their way to see him. Jim said he and Sarah were coming to look at the house today. Perfect. Connor nodded. Then we can... He was interrupted by the doorbell. It was only 8:30 in the morning, too early for visits. Are you expecting someone? Connor asked. No, I shook my head. Maybe it's Jim. He usually calls before he gets here, though. Connor stood up. I'll get it. You stay here. I heard him open the door, and I heard unfamiliar voices, female and male, polite but insistent. A moment later, Connor returned to the kitchen, accompanied by 2 visitors. Lucia, this is Dr. Elizabeth Wright from Newport Central Hospital and Mr. James Foster from Social Security, Connor introduced them. I stood up, a little confused. Dr. Wright was a slender, middle-aged woman with short dark hair and attentive eyes. Mr. Foster was a young man in a strict suit with a clipboard in his hands. Good morning, Mrs. Callow. Dr. Wright shook my hand. I apologize for the early visit, but we have a very busy schedule today. We're doing a routine review of patients diagnosed with dementia who are under home care, Mr. Foster added. Your case has made it onto our screening list. I cast a surprised glance at Connor. He nodded faintly. It was part of his plan. Sure, come on in. I pointed to the chairs. Would you like some coffee? No, thank you. Dr. Wright pulled a notebook out of her bag. Mrs. Callow, according to our records, you were recently diagnosed with the early stages of Alzheimer's-type dementia. Is that correct? My son and a Dr. Miller say so, I replied cautiously. But I have never been examined by Dr. Miller, and I believe that diagnosis to be false. Dr. Wright conducted a series of tests on memory, on orientation in time and space, on solving simple logical problems. I did flawlessly. Well, Mrs. Callow, Dr. Wright put the notebook away. I have to say, I don't see any signs of dementia or cognitive impairment. Your results are normal for your age group, even better than average. Very strange. Mr. Foster frowned. Dr. Miller's report indicates that you have severe short-term memory problems, disorientation, and occasional bouts of aggression. None of that is true, Connor interjected. Dr. Miller never examined Lucia. We believe that her son, James Callow, bribed the doctor to get a declaration of incapacity so that he could become Lucia's guardian. Before I could answer, the doorbell rang again. This time, Connor opened it with a noticeable satisfaction. A tall man in a smart suit stood on the doorstep. Agent Michael Donovan, FBI. He introduced himself, showing his badge. I'm looking for James Callow. He's not here, Connor replied. But he should be here today. Come on in, Agent Donovan. Mrs. Callow, he turned to me. I'm investigating a case of possible fraud involving forged medical records. Dr. Warren Miller was taken into custody this morning and is now testifying. He claims that your son paid him $5,000 for a false medical report that you were incapacitated. I felt my breath catching. $5,000. Jim paid $5,000 to declare me insane. Dr. Miller also claims this isn't the first time this has happened, Agent Donovan continued. He has worked with several realtors and lawyers to help unscrupulous heirs gain control of elderly relatives' estates. That's when we heard the sound of a car pulling up. I went to the window. Jim's black SUV pulled up in front of the house. That's my son, I said, feeling a strange mixture of relief and anxiety. A minute later, we heard the front door open. Jim had his own key. Mom, he called out. Are you home? In the kitchen, Jim, I said. He came in and his face changed instantly when he saw the crowd. Sarah, who had followed him in, froze in the doorway. What's going on here? Jim asked tensely. Who are all these people? James Callow? Agent Donovan stepped forward, showing his badge. Agent Michael Donovan, FBI. I need to ask you some questions regarding your interaction with Dr. Warren Miller. Jim's face went pale. I don't know what you mean. Mom, what's going on? I'd like to know that too, Jim, I replied calmly. For example, why did you pay Dr. Miller $5,000 for a false report on my incapacity? That's absurd, Jim exclaimed, but his voice trembled. Dr. Miller is a respected specialist. He has made a thorough examination. Mr. Callow, Dr. Wright intervened. I just ran cognitive tests on your mother. She shows no signs of dementia or other cognitive impairment. Mr. Callow, Agent Donovan pulled out a notepad. Dr. Miller has already admitted that he never performed an examination on your mother. He confirmed that you paid him for a false report. He's lying, Jim exclaimed. We have a record of a wire transfer from your account to Dr. Miller's account, the agent continued nonchalantly. $5,000 deposited 2 weeks ago. How do you explain that? Sarah, who had been silent until then, let out a quiet gasp and grabbed the door jamb. Jim? She looked at her husband with horror. Is it true? Jim ignored her question, his face contorted with anger. It's you, he pointed at me. You organized all of this. You and your friend. Mr. Callow, Agent Donovan stepped forward. I'm going to have to ask you to come with me to the FBI office to testify. I'm not going anywhere. Jim backed toward the door. Not without my lawyer. That's your right, the agent nodded. You can call your attorney into our office, but I insist that you come with me. Is this an arrest? Jim asked defiantly. Not yet. Agent Donovan was unfazed. But if you refuse to cooperate, I'll have to get a warrant for your arrest. Given Dr. Miller's testimony and the bank records, it won't take long. Jim looked cornered. His eyes darted around the room as if looking for a way out. What's going to happen? His voice trembled. What happens if I cooperate? It will be taken into consideration, the agent replied. Especially if you provide information about other cases in which Dr. Miller may have been involved. I don't know anything about other cases, Jim exclaimed. I just wanted this house. Those words, spoken with such blatant greed, hit me harder than all the previous events. My own son, my only child, whom I had raised with so much love, just wanted to take my house away with no concern for my fate. Why, Jim? I asked quietly. Why did you want my house? You have a good job, an apartment downtown. Because I deserve it, he suddenly shouted. All my life I've been in the background. First your job, then my father and his perpetual depression. Always someone or something was more important than me. And now you're sitting alone in this big house, and Sarah and I are crammed into a two-bedroom apartment. Agent Donovan pulled out his cell phone, which began to vibrate. "Excuse me," he said, stepping aside to answer it. He returned a moment later with an even more serious expression on his face. "Mr. Callow, I've just received information that Dr. Miller has given a detailed statement. He confirmed that you were aware of his illegal activities and specifically approached him specifically to obtain a false report. I'm afraid the situation has escalated." Jim turned even paler. That's not true. He's setting me up." Sarah suddenly stepped forward. "Agent Donovan, it's true. Jim knew his mother was completely healthy. We, uh, we found Dr. Miller through a realtor we knew who said he helps with elderly relatives." "Sarah!" Jim exclaimed. "No, Jim." Sarah shook her head, tears in her eyes. "I'm not going down with you. Lucia," she turned to me, "please forgive us. I didn't realize things would go this far." Agent Donovan made a sign to a colleague who had been standing by the door the whole time. "James Callow, you are under arrest on suspicion of fraud, forgery of documents, and attempted misappropriation of property. You have the right to remain silent." "Mom!" Jim shouted as the agent began to read him his rights. "Help me! Don't let them do this." I looked at my son, feeling my heart break. "Jim, you tried to declare me crazy to take my house. How could you do that?" "I'm confused." He lowered his eyes. "We're having money problems. I didn't mean to make you feel bad. I just thought the boarding house would take better care of you." "That's enough, Mr. Callow." Agent Donovan cut him off as he cuffed him. "You can explain everything in the office." As the agent led Jim out, he gave me one last desperate look. "Mom, please call Martins. Tell him to get to the FBI office right away." Sarah remained standing in the doorway, confused and depressed. "Lucia," she said quietly, "I'm so sorry. I didn't know it would turn out like this." "Mrs. Callow, Jr.," Agent Donovan addressed her. "You're going to have to come with us to testify as well." Sarah nodded, wiping away her tears. "Of course I will." "Lucia?" She looked at me. Jim really did find Dr. Miller specifically to get a fake report. He was planning to sell the house and buy a mansion in Bellevue Hills. I'm so ashamed. When they left, there was silence in the house. Dr. Wright promised to send an official report on my mental health, and Mr. Foster assured me that the custody order would be lifted as soon as possible. I was alone with Connor, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. "Are you okay?" he asked, putting his arm around my shoulders. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "My son got arrested for trying to declare me crazy. How can I be okay?" "It's not your fault, Lou," Connor said softly. "Jim made his choice. But what's going to happen to him now?" I couldn't stop thinking about Jim's face as they led him out in handcuffs. "A lot depends on you," Connor answered. "If you don't push for the maximum sentence, if you ask for leniency." At that moment, my phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number. "Mrs. Callow?" A woman's voice answered the phone. "It's Sarah. I've been authorized to make one call. Jim wants you to come to the FBI office. He's in a complete panic. He says that without your help, he could face up to 10 years in prison. Please help him. I'm begging you." I looked at Connor, giving him the gist of the conversation. "It's up to you, Lou," he said. "I'll support whatever you decide." "We'll be there," I said to Sarah. "Tell Jim I'll help him. But on my terms." The FBI office in Newport was in a modern glass and concrete building near the center of town. Connor drove and I sat beside him, trying to gather my thoughts. In my long life, I'd never been in a situation like this. My own son arrested for trying to declare me incompetent. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Connor asked, glancing at me briefly. "No one will judge you if you decide otherwise." "He's my son, Connor," I said quietly. "No matter what." Connor nodded without saying a word. He understood me better than anyone else. We were met at the front desk by a young employee who, after learning our names, immediately contacted Agent Donovan. A few minutes later, the agent himself came out to meet us. "Mrs. Callow." He shook my hand. "Mr. Rook, thank you for coming. Please follow me." We went through security and up to the third floor. Agent Donovan led us into a small conference room where a man in an expensive suit was already waiting. This is Richard Summers, the district attorney, Donovan introduced him. He'll be deciding what charges to bring against your son. Mr. Summers was a tall, thin man in his 50s with prematurely graying hair and a keen eye. Mrs. Callow, he nodded slightly. Please accept my apologies for this unpleasant situation. Unfortunately, fraud against the elderly is becoming more and more common. And it's even more unfortunate when the perpetrators are family members. Where's my son? I asked, not reacting to his words. In the interview room with his lawyer, Agent Donovan replied. His wife is in the next room. She has agreed to cooperate and is testifying. I want to see him, I said firmly. Agent Donovan glanced at the prosecutor. It's possible, Summers finally said. But first I'd like to explain the situation to you from a legal point of view. We sat down at the table. Connor next to me, Agent Donovan and the prosecutor across from me. Mrs. Callow, Summers began, there's serious evidence against your son. The wire transfer to Dr. Miller, the forged medical documents, the false testimony in court to get custody. In addition, the testimony of Dr. Miller, who has already admitted his role in the scheme. And what's he facing? I asked, feeling a chill go down my spine. On the aggregate of crimes, up to 10 years in prison and a large fine, the prosecutor spoke calmly, as if it was about the weather. Fraud, forgery of documents, perjury, attempted misappropriation of property. The list is impressive. The list is long. 10 years, I repeated. For trying to take my house? For the way he wanted to do it, Summers corrected. Declaring a healthy person mentally ill in order to deprive them of their property is a serious crime, Mrs. Callow. In some cases, such actions have resulted in the deaths of elderly people placed in mental institutions against their will. I understood the logic of the law, but I couldn't stop thinking about Jim behind bars for 10 years. My son, my only child. Is there any way to avoid such a harsh punishment? I asked. The prosecutor leaned back in his chair. It depends on several factors. First, on your willingness to press charges. If you refuse, we can still prosecute him for forgery and perjury, but without a primary victim, the case will be less high profile. I don't want to press charges, I said firmly. Second, Summers continued, as if he hadn't heard me. It depends on your son's cooperation. If he provides useful information about other similar cases or about Dr. Miller's working methods, it could go a long way towards softening his position. And then what? At best, probation, community service, a hefty fine, and possibly temporary revocation of some professional licenses. I turned to Connor. What do you think? I think, he answered slowly, that you need to meet Jim, look him in the eye and decide if he deserves your mercy. Agent Donovan nodded. I can arrange a meeting right now, but I must warn you that the conversation will be recorded. I understand, I replied. Take me to him. The interrogation room was exactly as I'd imagined it from the movies. Small, with bare walls, a large mirror, no doubt one way, and a table in the middle. Jim sat at the desk with his head down. Next to him was a middle-aged man in a gray suit, obviously his lawyer. When I entered, Jim looked up with fear and hope in his eyes. Mom! He jumped up, but the lawyer held his hand. Mr. Callow, please remain calm, said Agent Donovan, who had come in with me. I sat down across from my son. Without his usual swagger, in a wrinkled shirt and disheveled hair, he looked lost, almost like a child. Jim, I began, trying to keep my voice calm. I've been told what you're in for. Mom, you have to help me, he said frantically. Tell them you won't press charges. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding? I shook my head. You paid $5,000 to get a fake report on my mental health. You lied in court to become my guardian. You threatened me with a mental institution if I didn't sign the deeds to the house. How can this be a misunderstanding? Jim lowered his eyes. I'm confused. Sarah wanted a big house and I couldn't afford to buy it. And then I met this realtor, Morton, and he told me there was a way to solve these problems. Introduced me to Miller. And you thought it was okay to declare your mother crazy for a house? I didn't think you'd feel bad, Jim muttered. This boarding house has really good conditions, and you're going to need care soon anyway. I'm 77, not 97, I said sharply. And I'm in perfect health, as Dr. Wright confirmed. Jim's lawyer coughed. Mrs. Callow, I understand your outrage. But the question now is whether you're willing to help your son avoid a harsh punishment. I looked at Jim carefully. Why should I help you after what you've done? Because you're my mother. His voice trembled. And because no matter what, you love me, don't you? There was so much childish naivety in his words that I felt my heart clench. Yes, I loved him, no matter what. I can help you, Jim, I said slowly. But on my terms. Anything, he agreed hastily. First, the house stays mine. No talk of selling it or moving to a boarding house. Of course, Mom. Second, you're in therapy. I think you have a lot of unresolved resentments and issues that led to this situation. Jim hesitated for a moment but nodded. Okay. Third, Sarah needs to get a job. I know that one of the reasons for your financial problems is her unwillingness to work and her habit of living beyond her means. I'm not sure I can promise that for her, Jim said uncertainly. Then I'll talk to her myself, I said firmly. One last thing. You must cooperate fully with the investigation. Tell everything you know about Miller, about the realtor who introduced you, about this whole scheme. Jim looked at his lawyer, who nodded. I'll agree to all the terms, Mom, he finally said. I'll do whatever you ask. I turned to Agent Donovan. I will not press charges against my son, and I'm asking for maximum leniency. The agent nodded. I will relay your request to the prosecutor, but the final decision is his. As I left the interrogation room, I felt tired, as if I had lived another life in those few hours. Connor was waiting for me in the hallway. How did it go? He asked, looking at me carefully. I made conditions, I said. Jim agreed to everything. You're an amazing woman, Lou, Connor said quietly. I'm not sure I could be so merciful if I were you. It's not mercy, I shook my head. It's selfishness. I don't want to spend the rest of my life knowing that my son is in prison because of me. It wouldn't be because of you, Connor countered. It would be because of his own actions. Whatever, I took his hand. Let's get out of here. I want to go home. The process of resolving the situation took several weeks. Attorney Summers, impressed by my reluctance to punish my son and Jim's willingness to cooperate, agreed to a deal. Jim pleaded guilty to forgery and perjury, but the more serious charges were dropped. He was sentenced to 2 years probation, 200 hours of community service, and a $20,000 fine. Dr. Miller received 5 years in prison and forfeiture of his medical license. Realtor Morton, who set Jim up with Miller, was also arrested and awaiting trial. It turned out that they had pulled off at least 15 similar schemes together over the past 3 years. The order for my incapacity and Jim's guardianship was lifted by the court within a week of the arrest. The house was officially still in my possession, and any documents signed under duress were null and void. Sarah, as it turned out, did know about Jim's plan, though she claimed she didn't realize the illegality of it. She actively cooperated with the investigation, which helped mitigate her husband's sentence. When it was over, she came to my house, alone, without Jim. Lucia, she began, nervously fumbling with the strap of her purse. I wanted to apologize. What we did. It's unforgivable. But you're still hoping for forgiveness, I remarked, inviting her to sit down. I was blinded by greed, Sarah admitted. I thought I deserved a better life, a bigger house, status, and I pushed Jim, knowing how much he wanted to please me. And now what? I asked him. Are you going to stay with him, even though he's a criminal, unemployed, and in debt? Sarah looked up at me. I love him, and yes, I will stay with him, but I want to change, to be a better person. That's why I came to ask. Did you talk about a job for me? It was part of my plan. I've already discussed it with Connor. Yes, I nodded. Connor is looking for an assistant for his office. He's doing some security consulting right now, and he needs someone for administrative work. In the office of your, friend? Sarah was surprised. Exactly. Connor knows your role in all this, but he's willing to give you a chance. It's not the highest paying job, but it's stable, and more importantly, honest. Sarah looked astonished. Why are you helping me? After what I did? Because you're my son's wife, I replied simply. And if you really want to change, I'd rather help you than watch you drag Jim down. A month after all this happened, I threw a family dinner. I invited Jim and Sarah and Connor. Jim had already started a course of psychotherapy and, to my surprise, spoke favorably of it. Sarah was in her second week of working for Connor and, according to him, was diligent and capable. Dinner passed in a tense but polite atmosphere. We talked about the weather, about Sarah's work, about future plans, skirting the sharp edges. When I served dessert, I decided it was time for another conversation. Jim, Sarah, I began, there's something I want to tell you about. Or rather, Connor and I want to tell you. They looked at us with mild bewilderment. Connor and I have known each other for 30 years, I continued. We met when your father was still alive. I remember, Jim nodded. You said he was an old family friend. Not exactly, I took Connor's hand. Connor and I are more than friends, a lot more than that. Jim stared at our joined hands, then shifted his gaze to my face. What do you mean, Mom? I mean that Connor and I love each other, have been for years now. But, Dad? Jim looked confused. You cheated on Dad. Your father was a complicated man, Jim, Connor said softly. With serious problems. Lucia stayed with him, supported him through the years, but she needed support too. I can't believe it, Jim shook his head. All these years, you've been leading a double life? I did what I had to do, I answered firmly. Taking care of you and your father. But I have a right to be happy too. Sarah, to my surprise, put her hand on Jim's shoulder. Your mom's right. Everyone deserves happiness. Jim was silent for a long time, digesting the information. Finally, he asked, So what now? Are you going to get married or something? Connor and I looked at each other. We've decided to live together, Connor said. In this house, the formalities aren't that important to us. So he's going to live here now? Jim pointed at Connor. Yes, I nodded. And I hope you can accept that. Accept us. Jim looked like he wanted to object, but then he just sighed. I guess I don't have a say after all I've done. That's not the point, I smiled softly. The point is that I want you to be a part of my life, our life. But to do that, you need to accept my decisions. I need time to get used to it, Jim said honestly. But I'll try. That's all I ask, I squeezed his hand. When Jim and Sarah left, Connor and I sat on the veranda, looking at the stars over the bay. Do you think he'll be okay with it? Connor asked. In time, I nodded. Jim has a lot of things to rethink, not just our relationship, but his life, his decisions. What about you? Do you regret helping him? I thought for a moment. No, he's my son, and I love him no matter what. That doesn't mean I approve of what he did or that I forgave him easily. But I couldn't do otherwise. Connor put his arm around my shoulders. That's wisdom, Lou. Real motherly wisdom. We sat, hugging, on the veranda of the house I'd almost lost to my own son's greed. But now that house was filled with new hope. Hope that we could heal old wounds and build a new, more honest relationship. Connor by my side, Jim on the road to mending, Sarah trying to change. Maybe sometimes out of the darkest of situations, something light is born. I turned to Connor and said quietly, You know, it took me 77 years to learn to live in the present. Not the past, not the future, just today. Better late than never. Connor smiled and kissed me. At that moment, I was perfectly happy.